I would like to invite you all to climb on into my backpack, and together we will walk across New Zealand on the Te Araroa Trail tonight. The trail, a few things about it. It's about 3,000 kilometers long. I started right at the top in Cape Reinga about the end of October, and it took me 4.5 months to get all the way down. And of all those days on trail, I had 46 days dry feet days. So it's a very wet, green, beautiful country. Now, about 700 people start this trail each year, and only about half of them finish. And it's a very young trail, only about 7 years old. And the people have managed to connect all the old trails through the forests, and now it's actually one connected trail right from the top to the bottom. And 700 is also the age of this country, actually, because about 700 years ago, the first Maoris migrated down from Taiwan through the Polynesian islands and inhabited this very young country. If you compare that to Australia, which is about 50,000 years old, so it's a very young nation, and obviously about 300 years ago, first the Dutch and then the English came over and colonized it. So it's definitely a place with a lot of history, but it's also a very young country and a very young trail. Now, the whole trail took me about 4.5 million steps, which is a lot less than the amount of sheep out there, and I'll come back to that later. To give you some sense of scale, it's about walking from right here, where we are now, to Marrakesh in one line, and it's actually a little bit longer. So it's quite a long walk, and it's not that flat. It's actually a lot of hard work. They don't do switchbacks. It's just up and over each mountain. So let's just dive in, and we're going to start off right at the north, on the North Island, a little place called Cape Reinga, where a lot of tourists still go to make their picture, and obviously I made my picture too. But very soon the trail started, and we said goodbye to all the tourists, and this was the very start of the trail, where I sort of didn't know exactly what to do. I just thought I'd follow the path. And luckily, I saw the first of my trail markers, the orange markers, along the beach, and I would see many, many of these through the beautiful forests and mountains. And already I was struck by how different this landscape was. The sand was yellow, orange, and red, very vibrant colors everywhere around you. And I just, after about an hour's walking, I looked back to the very most northern point of the country one last time, and then turned around and really started the trail down the beaches, and which wasn't quite a trail, but it just, you know, we had to follow the beaches a lot. And the first night I was treated with a beautiful sunset and pitched my tent up. And it's important to note that most people, just like myself, start this trail totally alone, not in groups or anything. It's not an organization. You just sort of get there and start. So I wasn't alone, but I was alone, and on this first night there was a few other tents around me, and you sort of make your first little chit-chat, and I made my first sort of acquaintances. The trail then continues for about 4 or 5 days along 90 Mile Beach. It's just a very flat beach, and here I actually very much enjoyed this beach walk. And I was starting to do, let's say, experiments, how long I could walk with my eyes closed. And it took me about, I'd say about 20 minutes I was able to just sort of walk without daring to open my eyes and sort of trusting. You have to sort of navigate on sound. Obviously I'm not blind, but it was very interesting to experience what it must be for people who are blind, and sort of listen to the birds on one side and the sea on the other side, and then before I knew it, I was walking into the sea. But it was, I felt safe. And then sometimes I would take a little break in the dunes and have some lunch And along the way, I would see my first shark or even a stingray, which had been caught by local fishermen and just left behind because they were probably too small or whatever. So I really got to feel like I'm in a different country. Here in Holland, you don't really come across that many sharks on the beach. And again, the second night, I was treated with a beautiful sunset where I just packed my tent for the night. Now, after the beach walk, I'd sort of got used to my backpack, and suddenly the trail went straight up into 3 very dense forests. They were something I'd never experienced before, really rainforests with ferns, very, very muddy. And this gives you some impression of what the trail actually looks like a lot of the time. I'm wearing my rain kilt because it's raining. Something I hadn't done before. It's instead of wearing rain pants. And you sort of wind your way down this. You can see there is a trail, so it's not like you get lost the whole time. But it's definitely a challenge. It's very steep. And you're all alone, and you're in the middle of this beautiful Herikino forest, and you're falling and slipping quite a bit. And as I said, it's not green for there is a good reason for that. It's very, very wet. It rains a lot, and it can be very beautifully sunny. And this was spring. I just left the autumn of Europe behind me and was walking into spring. So you can see it was very hard work. I'd expected something else, and this trail just went straight up the mountain. I had my music, but either I was wet because it was raining, or I was soaking wet because I was sweating. It was really, really hard work. But also for the first time, I'm seeing these beautiful plants and nature that are very unique for New Zealand, and huge trees that luckily hadn't been taken away yet. And here also my encounter with the first hut. And there was about 7 other hikers, maybe a few more. I made a little fire, and that evening we were clearly the guests, because it was clearly someone else's house. There was lots of mice everywhere. But I was happy with the bed as I was very tired. And then the trail continued through this very dense forest, sort of jungle-like terrain, and it was here that I would often get lost and have to backtrack. So my trail fashion was soon over, as it was totally messy and dirty. And in these forests, there was very little space where you could actually, flat space where you could set your tent for the night. So if there was a flat spot, you soon notice at the end of the day that other hikers would start putting their tents up around. And so slowly the first bonds and friendships emerged. Then down into the valleys, the trail would continue actually through the river. For many miles or hours, you would just walk through the river, which at times was quite, deep. And luckily, they don't have any snakes or dangerous predators in New Zealand, but it was still very new and strange to actually have to walk through these quite deep rivers. And you can imagine if there was a bit of sun, we would quickly pack out all our wet tents and have some lunch so that everything could dry. And of course, I would always take every opportunity to dive into the water, because I love diving in the water, and it was cold, but it was great. And you can imagine at the end of a day like this, that your feet, you know what it's like if you spend an hour in a bathtub. Well, this is what happens to you if you spend 11 hours walking through a gorge. And the other predator, I guess, that we did encounter was the famous New Zealand sandfly. Every moment you actually stand still for more than 2 seconds, they attack you and drink your blood. And it itches for about a week afterwards, and they sort of swell up. So you just get used to this by every time you stop, you put your leggings on as soon as you get to camp. And that sort of, so you get your workarounds. The trail then continued, like I said, for days through the water, and you can imagine how happy we were to finally get into a pub and have a drink when we entered civilization again. The trail then continued for many miles as we walked back to Auckland, which took about 3 weeks, and there was a lot of beach walking with beautiful, where the trail sort of followed the beach line. And like I said, it was nearly becoming summer, so it was just beautiful skies. And we would come across lots of these little coves with perhaps a little cabin that someone had put there perhaps 50 years ago. But very uninhabited, and everyone was thinking, oh, I should buy a place here, or, you know, it was just totally untouched, especially up there right in the Northland. And these coves, I would always jump in at any opportunity I could, although everyone would say, there's sharks out there, there's sharks out there. And so each beach line is always different. It's not just flat beaches, sometimes there's rocky beaches, sometimes even kind of tropical. This was a great place to put up our tent for the night. And we'd often, the trail would cross the sea estuary, like you can see here, and we'd have to be very careful to cross that when the tide was low, because this picture you can see that at some points this was actually at low tide. It was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and still we had to cross a whole estuary like this. So you can imagine if you do this at high tide, you basically can't cross there. So the whole living and hiking with weather and the changing elements and the changing tides is something you had to be very aware of. You couldn't just sort of wing it and see, oh, I'll just see what happens. I guess you could, but then you would have to camp and rest for a day before the sea would go down. So there's something, yeah, you had to stay quite awake because the elements were always there to sort of catch you off guard. We continued on, and then in the far, we could now see Wangarae Heads, a high mountain. For us, we thought it was a high mountain, and I was really happy to get up on top, take this picture, and I could look all the way around. And you can really feel that it's an island, because if you're this high, you can see both sides of the island. It's very thin, long island. It was so beautiful that I decided to pitch my tent up there with another guy, Jasper, and Prancer, and we just had a great night, although we'd had quite a short day. We just thought this is such a beautiful spot, we just quickly put our tent up there. And again, with a beautiful view down over the bay. And these beautiful rock formations as we slowly get closer and closer to Auckland. Now, as I said, because this trail is very new, there is lots of sections that don't go through nature. They sometimes go through farmland, but sometimes the farmer says, I don't want these smelly hikers to go through my land. So we have to do a lot of road walking to connect the national parks. And road walking is not fun. No one likes to hike across very busy roads. It's dangerous, and it's... so what I would do, I would use my rain cover for my backpack and put it around my shoulder, or put it like a balloon next to me so that the cars could see I was coming. And I've got to say, a lot of people opted to actually start hitching the road sections because they were just uncomfortable and dangerous. But me and a group decided we wanted to connect all our steps and actually walk the entire trail. So we actually did miles and miles of road walking. Sometimes the glare from the asphalt was so strong that I sort of had to put a bandana around me like a horse to make it darker around my eyes, because it was just so bright. And then in Auckland, I bought a new pair of shorts that had a lot of light, which also obviously looked damn good. But they also, the cars saw me coming, and I felt a little safer with them. And although this isn't my leg, this is basically what happens if you do a lot of road walking. Poor old Popcorn, this was her foot, and there was a lot of people with a lot of injuries, so you really had to look after your feet especially with all this road walking. And yeah, it was a serious hike. Now, something that was also I really wasn't expecting is that the trail kept passing through towns. And at the beginning, I didn't really like this. I wanted to be out in the nature and away from society. But so I was a bit in conflict, but actually, the more and more I came in contact with these towns, I actually came in contact with the people of New Zealand. Obviously, they were strangers to me, and I was this sweaty guy with a big beard, but they were inviting me into their home, giving me a beer, giving me their guest room, or letting us pitch our tent in their garden, and it really, really made a big impact on me. Just stopping and having a chat with someone, and while I was doing a chat, I just got a beer from someone or whatever. I would always make a little painting. I had 2 little colors of paint with me, and I would make a little painting and give it to her, and it sort of created a great way to sort of connect. And even here at the supermarket, Tanya, who just helped pack in my groceries, so I walked back and I said, hey, here's a little painting. So it gave me a lot of pleasure, and it gave them a lot of pleasure. And along the way, I met a nun, a farmer, a homeless person, and hunters. And we just, through this painting, I was able to connect with them and have a little chat. And this wonderful couple, at one point, we walked into a town on Christmas Eve, and we wanted to have somewhere to stay, but there was no place at the inn. So we walked on, and finally, this couple, we walked past there and asked them, could we perhaps pitch our tent in your garden on Christmas Eve? And they said, yeah, sure. And we actually had dinner with them, Christmas dinner. And I just, would I do the same if, 3 smelly hikers turned up and on Christmas Eve, and would I let them join? I don't know, So it really touched me and made a big impression on me, these beautiful people. This lady still has the Maori tattoo on her chin. And along the way, meeting hikers, but also locals, really made the whole experience very special, and something that had actually made a lot more impact on me than actually the nature. But it wasn't what I was expecting. So that's definitely something that sort of opened up a new box in me, and that perhaps now that I'm back home, I'm going to try and channel that and see what I can do with that here in my daily life here. And like I told you, I had some paints with me, and I really, really enjoyed doing the painting. Also because others were enjoying it. And I think I made perhaps 200 or 300 little paintings along the trail. Often there would be a trail register at a hostel or in a hut or in a cafe, and I would quickly, instead of writing something, make a little painting. And along the way, I made lots of different sort of paintings trying to reflect what I'd just been hiking through, sometimes with some humor. This was a horrible day, slipping and sliding, and everyone was swearing at this day. But also sort of reflecting these endless routes that we would walk through. I mean, these forests are like, it feels like it's one giant route. And this was my way to interpret that. Or sometimes this actually got me a free pint. When we were at a bar, I quickly made a painting, gave it to the landlord, and it wasn't my intention to get a free beer, but, which you're going to do. And also, obviously, the beautiful nature we were going through, and just playing with the different colors I had, trying different techniques, all things I don't really make time for when I'm here back at home. And I really, really enjoyed it. I also tried to do some people this time. I thought, why am I painting all these mountains the whole time? So I switched to people. And at one point, I gave a hostel owner a painting thanking him for letting us stay. And he said, oh, I've got a wall. Maybe you want to do something on that. So an hour later, I'd scribbled something on the wall, which was a lot of fun. And there was another day after a long road walk. I walked into an antique store, and I asked this lady, hey, I'd like to make a painting for you. Do you have something, I could paint on? And she goes, yeah, sure, if I can give you a lunch. So while she prepared a lunch for me, she showed me to some walls she had at the back, and I made this painting for her that was, yeah, sort of a reflection of the terrain we'd been walking through that past few days. Sometimes I'd ask a homeowner if he had some wood, so that was also new for me. I really like it when artists work on wood, and I hadn't really done much of it, and then, you know, the grain and the color of the wood comes through. I was allowed to stay in the house of a music teacher at one point, and I was there a bit early, so I asked him for a big piece of wood, and I made this of it, and he put it in his house, and together we played music, and there was about 7 of us. And he taught us all these sort of Maori spiritual songs, and it was hippie galore. I loved it. And they were vegan. They were real hippies. So that evening, I was allowed to sleep on the living room floor and couldn't feel more happy next to the painting. And one last thing about the painting, I was hiking with a lot of people from all over the world, and at one point we had to say goodbye to some people who were going to take the bus. So we had to wait about 2 hours in the sun. So I suggested, shall I give a painting class? And they were all, yay, let's have a painting class. So with my two paintbrushes and my 4 colors, we sort of passed them around, and I was very, very strict. I said, more water, more water. I really gave them a lesson, and at the end of my class, they all proudly showed what they'd made. And it's again something I feel I should perhaps do more often here, because it just makes people so happy, and it in turn made me very happy. Now, you've been seeing a lot of people in the pictures, and although I started alone, I was very fortunate to hike very closely with 2 girls that became my trail family. They are here today, so you have to give them a big round of applause. It was just the best, although we generally walk alone during the day, because they would be up even earlier than I, and when I woke up, they would already be gone. We generally walk alone during the day, but at lunchtime or in the evening, we would camp together, or in the towns, we would book a hostel together, and we just slowly grew together, although we were very different characters. And I've got to say, these girls really made my trail magic. And I'd like to introduce, first, we have Unicorn. And then we have Sunny. And then, of course, we have Van Gogh. Wasabi! So together we were a strange couple, and we called ourselves Butter Chicken, because every town we would go into, we would always go straight to the Indian. We didn't even have to make the plan. We just knew in town at 12 o'clock we're going to have butter chicken. That was just the thing. And it was great. You know, when we were high in the mountains, when it was quite scary terrain, or doing the river crossings, we stuck together and shared information and really helped each other across the dangerous areas. And in the more open areas, predictable areas, I would perhaps not even see them for a few days. So we all did our own thing. There wasn't really plans, or what are you going to do, or all this kind of thing. It sort of naturally flowed, but it felt very safe being with these great girls. And obviously we hiked on Christmas, because that's all we do. We just hike. So we put on a hat. Now, the trail then took us over Mount Tongariro, a beautiful place, a huge volcano in the middle of nowhere, red, orange, purple colors. And it had inspired the creators of Lord of the Rings to film there. And it also inspired me to make a photo shoot, kind of inspired by the Lord of the Rings. And throughout the trail, we did about, I don't know, 10, maybe 5, I'm not quite sure, different photo shoots, just having some crazy fun. And I'd like to share a few of them with you. So it's amazing. It's amazing what you can actually do with a tent. So it would always be that I'd see a beautiful mountain range, and suddenly we'd be hiking, and I'd say, "Stop, stop, everyone! Get out your sleeping bags, or put your tent around you." And they're like, "Oh man, I'm sweating. It's really hot. I've got to get in my sleeping bag." But it created some great shots, and I'm happy we did it. You've got to have some fun up there. Now the trail takes us further on a river, the Wanganui River, and 7 days we paddled down this huge river with all our belongings and all our food with us for 7 days. And it rained a lot. And you still have to paddle. And luckily we were given a few of these big plastic drums in which we could put all our food and our drink, which we didn't have to carry on our back this time. So we had like wine and beer this time. But it really was quite tough, and luckily the weather was also very good. And it was just stunning, and a lot of hard work, but it was beautiful. And as you all know, on the 21st of June, it's Hike Naked Day. So obviously I had to paddle naked this year. But it was so hot that I only lasted 3 hours, and then had to put on my clothes because I was just being burnt alive. But yeah, you got to do it. Now the trail takes us up into the first real big mountains, the Araroas, which are beautiful. They're right at the bottom of the North Island, and we were treated with some classic ridge walking, and just breathtaking that you walk over the crest of the mountain for quite a few hours, and on both sides the mountain drops down a few hundred feet. And it's just beautiful. And it's not like if you tip, you fall. It's quite safe, but it's just visually very beautiful. But as you can see, it's still very beautiful weather here, but only two hours later, suddenly the clouds were rolling over the mountain and into the valley, and the following day we had to continue over this ridge, even higher over the mountain, and it was really, really bad weather. It was like really hard wind, and we had to go over this mountain, and we couldn't see where we were going. We stayed relatively close, but it was really, really scary, because this is the kind of place that hikers 2 years before us had just been blown off and had perished. So it's very real, this. And this was scary. Bit of hands and feet work here. Sorry for the film work. So you can see, I can only see perhaps 30, 40 meters. And we were very, very happy when this 4-hour section was behind us. Anyway, just over the top, we were luckily could go down into the forest again, which was just went straight down, and was really like climbing a route ladder all the way down. And when we were finally down in the valley again, had lighter backpacks because we'd finally got to the bottom of the North Island and had reached the sea again. So now I'd like to take you over the channel, and we're gonna see what the South Island is like. And the South Island, totally different. There's not many people who live there. It's empty, it's beautiful. It's kind of what you expect of New Zealand when you've seen all the pictures. It's basically Scotland, a tropical Scotland on steroids kind of thing. I was also really happy to switch into some new shoes. It was my 3rd pair already. And you may not be aware of this, but if you do long-distance hiking, your feet actually grow 1 or 2 sizes up. So when you do a long hike, more than, let's say, 2 weeks, always buy shoes about 2 sizes up. I'm actually now on 3 sizes larger. All my shoes that I used to have, I can't walk anymore. So that's just something to be aware of. So we took the ferry across and immediately were struck by the beauty of the countryside, the openness, the remoteness, and the trail followed the Queen Charlotte Trail, which is about 4 days of beautiful bays with sort of turquoise seas. And it made me a very happy camper. And it was also here that for the first time we were seeing a lot of indigenous birds. Here the weka, very naughty animal that would always steal your shoes or your lunch from where you were. So you had to be very careful with this one. And now ahead of us was the Richmond's Ranges, the first real mountains that we would cross. And it was very tricky because it was like a 8-day trek through very difficult terrain, and we'd have to do a lot of river crossings. But because there was a storm coming, there was obviously a lot of water coming, which would make the river crossings impossible. So we spent, with the 3 of us, hours discussing whether we should or shouldn't embark on this stretch, or perhaps stay in the village for a week and let the storm blow over. But in the end, we decided to head out and just take a lot of extra food with us. And the first day was kind of okay and was beautiful as we walked up and over. And in the hut that night, everything was wet, and there was probably about, I would say, 12 other hikers. Everyone was wet. Everyone had hung up all their soaking stuff, and luckily there was a little fireplace. But here you can also begin to get an impression of what the river crossings were like without the storm. So this was our first serious river crossings that were quite challenging and quite deep. The trail took us higher and higher, and the weather slowly deteriorated, but it was still beautiful, and this was kind of what I was expecting, the sort of days and days away from society, beautiful, outstretched mountain lands and ridge walking. And often I could see in the distance Sunny and Unicorn with their red backpacks in front of me. Now, we had to go over Mount Rintel, one of the highest mountains that we'd had encountered until then. And this mountain was really high, but we had to get over it into the next hut before the storm came. So we were really pushing on, but it was probably the most technical and steep part of the trail that we'd encountered. And here you get some sort of sense of scale, how steep it was. And all the footing was very loose, and we had to go all the way. You can see the trail down there, and here you can see the clouds are rolling in. So we're really having to make some speed, but we couldn't really because it was really difficult terrain. So here you can see we had to go all the way down here. Then the trail goes up there and up there. So it goes here. You can see it there. So this is big country, but it's beautiful. And then suddenly, out of nothing, I see a very familiar face. My dear friend Goldie, who I'd met the previous year in the PCT in US. My 20-year-old Austrian dear friend. And it was actually his fault that I was doing this trail. He'd once told me, dude, I'm going to extend my summer for 1.5 years. I'm going to New Zealand. And I was like, that's such a brilliant idea. And I couldn't get the thought out of my head. And so it's his energy, enthusiasm that actually got me to do this trail. And you can see he's doing the whole trail in a pair of boxer shorts and a Hawaii shirt with a tiny pack. You can imagine my pack was about 8 kilos base weight without food and water. But his was 3.5. And he did the whole trail on bedrock sandals. So believe me, anything is possible if you just put your mind to it. But we were now at the top of the mountain, and at the top of the mountain, my phone would often get reception because it would be in contact with a village. And then suddenly I would get like lots of messages. And suddenly I would be calling with my family who are on the other side of the world. And I have to say, I'm a very lucky camper to have such a wonderful family that give me the freedom to sort of roam around the world. And they've all kind of got used to it. And my wife is amazing that I can do these things. She's actually at the moment doing a trail herself, so we sort of do it. We can't do them all together because we still have children. But they were all happy that we were doing it, and they kind of get used to it. So I'm very lucky. Then I got another call, and it's my parents from the other side of the world. Always good to catch up with them. And then, there's another weather message, and it turns out that the rain really is coming, and it's coming big time. So we have to run down off the mountain, and finally we get to Made.For.Digital hut. We're kind of safe. You know, we got a house, we got a fireplace, but we don't know when exactly the storm's going to hit, within a few hours. But we can't go on because the trail actually follows the river. So we just don't dare. It's like 4 hours where you have to walk through the river. And if that storm suddenly hits, there could be a flash flood and you're basically dead. So we decided to stop there and basically make this little hut our home for the next 3 days. And this was the river just next to the hut. As we arrived, I actually had a little bath in it. But within 6 hours of raining, it had turned into this. And it was insanely wild. It was about 1 meter higher. And you can kind of get a feel for how dangerous these rivers is. So basically, we sat down and decided to enjoy the rest we had. And this gives you some impression of what life is like on the trail if you don't walk.
This is home. For 2 days or a week. Say hi, everyone.
Hi.
There we are. Let's see what's outside while we're here. Oh, look. There's a chopping man. It's Chris making some fire for tonight. Look at that. This is our little home that we've been living in the last 2 days and maybe a few more. And we're in the middle of nowhere. And this is the reason why we are actually here, stuck between 2 raging rivers that are just insane. Look at that. This used to be blue up to my ankles yesterday, and I had a swim in blue. Well, they say that the rivers really are the most dangerous things of this trail, so you have to keep your wits around you, and because in New Zealand it really does rain a lot. So we had about 4 cyclones that hit us in 4 months, and it rained sometimes. It was generally also very beautiful weather. But anyway, so we sat down. I actually read a whole book in 3 days, which I generally never do. And we went out and chopped the wood to keep the fire going, just chopped down a tree that was next to us, you know, kind of like you do. And then when the water had slowly kind of got down, we decided to head on. And it was the gorge that we had to cross many times. So it's after the storm, but it's still quite dangerous, and here you can kind of see Sunny crossing the river, and it really has a lot of force, and this was definitely something that was very unpleasant, because you can see that she has her buckles of her backpack are loose. In case she falls, then she can throw her backpack off and it doesn't drag her down. You see the water is already clear, but it's still very strong and powerful. And then finally we get out of this really quite tough section, and there's endless tussock valleys to cross, and we finally reach Saint Arnaud and have our first shower in 10 days. And there also I was really happy and surprised to meet my parents. What a gift. They'd also decided to come to New Zealand and were doing a camping road trip through the entire country, and we were seeing everything for themselves. And they brought over a big tent, and this was their blue palace, which is pretty good if you're 75, going on 80. And the following day we had dinner, and they joined us on the trail. And it was great to just walk with them, and that I could get a feel for the trail, and they could actually see what the trail was like with all the routes and all the stories I'd been telling. They could really get a feel for it. So you can imagine I was very, very proud. And they're here too, so we should give them a big round of applause. Yeah, true rock stars. So they said goodbye. They went back to their blue palace and on this great epic road trip through New Zealand. And I continued on up into the mountains. And throughout the South Island, I stayed in a lot of huts. There's probably about 2,000 huts throughout the country, old hunters' huts and trampers' huts. And we bought a pass that we could sleep in all of them. And they were just beautiful. Some of them very old, like this one, very, very old, but offered a shelter if it stormed. Some very romantic. Someone had even put a chair here and some cooking stuff. And often there would be a fireplace that you could actually make some warmth, should it be, especially if you're hunting in the winter. And I would often choose to sleep on the floor because it just gave me a bit more space around me. And there was usually about 6 bunks. And it was great because it kind of felt safe. And sometimes there would be a hut with only 2 bunks, a very cute little one high on the mountain. And the dock department are setting up more and more modern huts like this. And they would always have a little outhouse where you could go to the toilet, and this was basically the view of going to the toilet, which isn't bad. Let's give you some sort of feel for all these different huts all over, tucked high in the mountains. There would always be about 4 to 10 hours walk out of the society, so you would never really see tourists up here. And often I would choose to set up my tent outside the hut just to escape the snorers and have some privacy. The trail now takes us even higher on to the high mountains of the Nelson Lakes. And here we really had to go straight up the mountain. We decided to go stick close. This was quite a sketchy area. The trail just went straight up. And this was a bit where I just look in front of me, didn't dare to look down, because if you look down, you sort of feel the mountain drop down behind you, just get to the top. So this guy could do the entire island in 2 weeks. So I'd also like to talk to you about the food. Obviously we had to eat, but the trail rarely came through villages. So we'd always carry our food with us, and wherever you want, you just stop and have dinner or lunch. And so every village I would stock up in a supermarket and buy. This is probably food for about 4 days, but sometimes we'd have to stock up for 10 days. And that would really make your backpack super, super heavy, which was not nice. So you can imagine walking out of town, your backpack's super heavy, and when you're finally, a few days later, walking back into town, it's really light. So all this weight was really quite a problem. You're trying to get rid of stuff, but you need stuff. And sometimes we'd even send food to remote villages because you couldn't buy any food there. So we'd make these food packages. We did this about 3 or 4 times. And this is kind of what my evening dinner ritual would look like. I had a little gas stove here. But at one point, Unicorn and I decided we really wanted to go light, because all the stuff you carry in your backpack, you have to carry all the way over each mountain. And we were coming across all these guys with just tiny backpacks. And we were like, we got to give this a go, perhaps. So I sent about two kilos away to a friend of mine and actually got rid of my stove, which made me stoveless. And it basically meant that I was eating wraps for lunch, but also for dinner. And it's a bit of a mind game, but if you get used to it, it's fine, actually. And I also experimented with cold soaking, which is basically, I bought this jar for $12. And you put your noodles in it, and you put some water in it, and then you walk for another 2 hours. And then it's hydrated, and you can eat any meal that you actually care to eat. It's just not warm, but you're so tired anyway, so you'll eat anything. But this didn't really work for me. I kind of, at the end, stuck to my wraps. And all the water that we drank was always from streams and lakes, and this I would always filter with my SteriPen Ultra, which is a UV light technology, and you put it in the water for about 90 seconds, and then it kills all the bacteria, because you never know if there's a dead goat upstream that's contaminating the water. So you really, everyone was always really serious about filtering their water. Then the trail takes us past the Southern Alps, and we, for the first time, really saw these huge mountains in the distance, and I was so happy that the trail wasn't actually going to take us up and over these snowy peaks. But it was obviously really great to see them. And the country then just got insanely rugged and beautiful. And in the mornings, I'd get up really early and be treated by these sort of golden skies. But it was also at this point that I got sick. I got a stomach bug, I don't know what, you know, something, wasn't a food poisoning, but I got sick in my stomach. And like you do, you know, you don't eat very well. You go to the toilet a lot for perhaps 4 days. But it also resulted that I got even thinner and basically made me weak. But I was still hiking about probably 11 hours a day. So the combination just actually resulted that although the sickness was over in perhaps about 5 days, it translated to my mental state of mind and just turned me into quite a quiet. Yeah, and I was just not enjoying the trail. I was not happy. And the strange thing is that I was walking through the stunning scenery, and my eyes could see that it was beautiful, but I couldn't appreciate it. And it's probably, I've never experienced depression or anything, but it's probably, for the first time, I could sort of taste what that could perhaps be, where your eyes see the normality, but you feel it very different. In this case, I was just walking through this stunning beauty of nature, doing all the work, but I was just not enjoying it, and I wasn't getting pleasure out of it, and I was beginning to have troubles with motivation and, you know, getting up and doing the same, and suddenly the magic of hiking had sort of gone. And it was also in this phase that a lot of people around me were having the same sort of issues, and were, for what reason they may have, were deciding to quit. So they've done like maybe 3 months of hiking, and then they decide, you know, this isn't for me. So it was a really tough. It wasn't super tough. I didn't sort of really decide to stop, but it's just became a really long hike, which was a lot of hard work. And again, you're walking through these sort of picture postcards, a really weird. Take on reality. Empty and beautiful, and you have it all to yourself. Like when you're walking, you just look around, you don't see any hikers or anything. And finally got down and walked into Wanaka. And you see the weather's already changing. Wanaka, a beautiful little town, and it was really windy there. And I'll give you an impression of kind of weather. Yeah, it was windy, and the country here really got magical. You know, we were just going up and down, and it was very tough. But we knew there was another big storm coming, So a section that would normally take about 3 or 4 days, the three of us decided to just power it, and we did about 40 kilometers a day over this section. Pretty crazy town, which is great to send your teenage kids to. That's where they invented bungee jumping. But you can see up there that the snow had fallen over the mountains, so it really gave a good, satisfying feeling that we'd got over the mountain in time. So now the final push, and if you ever decide to go to New Zealand, and you'll probably end up in Queenstown at some point, I very much recommend doing a 4-day hike that looks kind of like this. All you need is like good tennis shoes and a sleeping bag, and you can sleep in huts. And this is the country that you'll walk through. You'll be away from the tourists. You're going to get wet feet, but it's just beautiful. You think, I've been walking for about 4 months, and I think I've seen it all. And then you're walking through this beautiful valley. And it's quite flat, so there's not big climbs. So if you're ever out there, this is a great 4 or 5 day hike. And there's Sunny up front. And also they have a lot of swing bridges, so you don't have to actually walk through the rivers here. But throughout the trail, we probably crossed about, 30 to 50 of these swing bridges, sometimes over huge gorges, and you're just walking over a wire. So it's quite scary at the beginning, but at the end, you're pretty happy that they're there, because otherwise you'd have to go down through this raging river. And walking on and going more and more through farmland, and we saw a lot of sheep. They have 60 million sheep, apparently, which also create a lot of beautiful little pictures along the way, which I thought I'd love to share with you. Some were live, some were dead. And then the last province of Otago also kind of felt like Marlborough country, very rugged, again with these huge tussock plains. Some beautiful pictures here by Unicorn. And the weather was again changing every day. And here we can see the last piece of ridge walking we're doing. And the following day, I could see for the first time the very southern point of Bluff. It still would be about 3 or 4 days hiking. And I went down into the valley and was treated with another beautiful moss forest that was just as muddy as the one right at the beginning. But it was just stunningly beautiful, and I was really enjoying it because I knew it was going to be my last beautiful forest. And now suddenly autumn was upon us, whereas here in Europe the spring was upon us. So it was totally the other side of the world. And for the last few days, we did another section along the beach. And with the three of us sort of talked about all the great days we'd had and the wet days and the worst days. And it was great to sort of flash back through the entire trail with these great girls. And there we are, right at the bottom. And I made a jump for joy because I was happy and proud. And then I made a little painting of it. So I was super happy to be down there and have completed it, because for me it was very important, also for the girls, to actually have walked every step of the way. And we'd done it, we'd been, stayed healthy. Our parents and everyone at home was still all healthy. So we were, it was good. So I reflected back, had the trail changed me perhaps? Now, I don't believe the trail really changes me, but I definitely lost a lot of weight. I lost about 8 to 9 kilos, so I hope to get it back pretty soon. But it also, again, made me appreciate that our time here is very short. And, yeah, that more and more friends around me are passing away. Life is just very short, and it's very important to spend time, I believe, with your friends and with your family. But I think it's also very important to spend time alone. And it also has a lot of good effect on the relationships you have. And that's why I do it. Another thing I've continued to do is doing these, what I call little micro-adventures, where each month, instead of going with the whole family to the beach, I go with each child separately and do a little adventure. It could be shopping, could be having a beefsteak, but it could also be just camping with my son 10 minutes from my house. So I really enjoy doing these things, trying to make the adventures very small instead of that they always have to be very big. Another thing that I've talked about is that this impact of strangers really shook me, and I still haven't quite found the right way to incorporate that in my life back here, but it's definitely something I'm very became awake of, how humbling it is to have strangers in your home, and that I was invited into other people's homes. And I think with the painting, that's something I will try to continue to try and build little bridges with people on the street. I also really enjoyed writing during the trail, and many of you have read these stories, and I really enjoyed it, and thank you all for your reactions. And it's something, it's a new adventure for me. It's something I'm really quite serious about now. I'm trying to write a book, which is a lot of fun. So once you get, maybe in a few months, you'll get an email saying, buy my book, then you've got to buy it. And I'm also thinking of doing, for the first 500, there's going to be a limited edition where everyone gets a little painting. So you've got to get one fast. And another thing I've been doing last year a lot is giving talks to companies, more than 30 companies in and around Amsterdam, which I really enjoy, and sort of tailor them depending on the conference or the... So it's definitely something you can take away if you think, hey, that could be fun. I invite him to give a talk at your company or at your clients. It's something I really enjoy doing. And yeah, I did that a lot last year. So having said all this, you may be thinking, you know, is this hiking something for me? Obviously, you've probably done some hiking, but I don't know, like 5 months of hiking, I don't know, that's quite a hard sell. So I have a suggestion for everyone sort of itching and thinking, you know, this is a bit big, but where do I start? So my advice would be, in the next month, book a flight to Bilbao, and do the Camino del Norte for 7 days alone. You won't be alone for long because you're going to meet your new family there. Oh, wrong button. If you fly to Bilbao for 88 euros, then take the train to San Sebastian and then walk along the coast. It's about 135 kilometers. It's beautiful. You will be alone during the day, but you will meet other people. All you need is some tennis shoes, a backpack, and a sleeping bag, and you can sleep in hostels all the way. Anyone here can do it. It's really easy. It's great. You don't need your partner with you. You don't need your kids. They can miss you for at least 7 days. Just treat yourself some alone time. So, and this is the people that you're going to meet, your new trail family, that you don't know yet, but when you meet them, you're going to have very special connections. People in a totally different social background, and they will wake new questions up in you, and I think you deserve it. So, thank you very much.